But we're going to present the power of fresh prepared this morning. And in case you're wondering, hey, that power off sounds familiar to me, you are absolutely right. Last year we were here and we presented the power of produce. And I wanted to let everybody know that we did do an updated version. It's an annual study. And if you're interested in receiving a copy of the power of produce, do send me an email and I'll be very happy to pass that along to you. My contact information will be on the very last page. But let's talk a little bit about the power of fresh prepared. It's a topic that goes very much hand in hand with produce, as we'll see throughout the presentation. Produce is a very mature and big and fast-growing department. It's an enormously important driver of where people go to shop, why they switch stores. It's a $64 billion department. If you then switch to fresh prepared, it's a $14 billion department. So produce is very much the big brother, and as such can play very much of a wingman sort of role for fresh prepared. And if you look at the entire perimeter of the store, right now that's really where the growth has to come from. Even though the majority of sales is still generated in what we call center store, that's about 65 to 70% of total sales, the growth is really coming from the perimeter. But if you look at what is driving growth, really the only ones that are putting good sales dollar numbers on the board are produce and deli, and specifically fresh prepared. So as such, deli and produce very much go hand in hand. Meat is growing in volume, but because of the deflation, it is struggling right now. And so it's really important for us to understand how produce, as that massive, mature, very important market, can help drive fresh prepared to make sure that the story overall becomes better from a total store perspective. If you look at fresh prepared and deli, and when I say deli, it includes things like cheeses and deli meats, and fresh prepared will just really be that the pizzas and the salads and everything that is basically ready to eat or can be heat and eat. There's been really robust and good growth over the last couple of years, certainly growth that is far ahead of the total store. But we also know fresh prepared has enormous competition from restaurants all over the place. And if you think about the restaurant markets and the fact that new ones are popping up left and right, representing countries from all over the world, and restaurants that are established and chains are constantly innovating menus, fresh prepared has to be really on its tippy toes to keep up that kind of growth. The other thing to keep in mind is that fresh prepared, in a way, at $14 billion, it's a lot easier to put growth numbers like we've seen up on the board, because it's a lot easier to move a small number than to move a giant number like this produce. So we have to be very innovative in fresh prepared, and we have to leverage all the strengths throughout the store to keep this kind of growth going, because it is so incredibly important to get deli right and to get produce right. And I promise I won't have a whole lot of these kinds of complicated graphs. I'm not a big fan of them. But I wanted to share this one because Nielsen did research that is the best in class retailers. And they looked at the total parameter and said, what are these retailers that we call the high velocity retailers? So they turn over inventory really fast, they generate sales really fast. What are they doing differently? And what they're doing differently, as you can see, is that purple piece right there, and that's deli. Among the fast, high-velocity retailers, deli is a much larger share of their total parameter than it is in these slow-moving. And the big difference is meat is the one that becomes smaller, but produce in green pretty much holds its own. So that's really important to know, is among the big and the really, really good retailers, it is produce hand in hand with deli that is driving growth in the parameter. But more importantly, it translates to a better sales in the total store as well. So these are stores that are not just better at the perimeter, they are better altogether. And that's really what the power of fresh prepared aims to do, to move more of these people from this side of the screen to that side of the screen by providing some consumer insights into the deli fresh prepared category. So we asked about 3,200 shoppers all the ins and outs of how do you plan your meal? Where does fresh prepared come in? What sort of roles? When do you eat out? When do you cook a meal? And really, do you mix and match? And that's really what this study is all about, and I'll be sharing that with you, trying to provide a bit of a produce perspective as we go through it. So we're going to talk about what is the opportunity, what is really the image and reputation right now of fresh prepared, where do people go to buy it, what are the big competitive forces, and last but not least, what can we change about the department to better meet expectations and bump up that growth even further. So let's get started with just simply sketching out the opportunity of fresh prepared and how produce fits into that. So this is what a typical week looks like. And we all know one week isn't the next, but when we talk to shoppers and we try to understand what does your typical week look like, we're looking at about 4.4 out of those 7 meal occasions, because we're talking dinner now, are home cooked with some level of preparation. In other words, we didn't just go to a restaurant or go to a supermarket. There is some level of cooking involved. The other 2.6 occasions involve meals that are prepared by somebody else. Now, when it comes to produce and it comes to fresh prepared, there's really opportunities in both of these. Because if we think about it, these meals right here, a lot of people no longer just cook from scratch, as we'll see here in a minute. So there's a lot of opportunity there for produce and fresh prepared. And then when it comes to takeout, the big question is, how can retailers become the destination of that I have somebody else cooking my meal tonight versus a restaurant? So we're going to be looking at both these sides of the meal opportunity, and what's really interesting is how the opportunities are moving. Because we all know, we all hear it, millennials are eating out at a higher rate. So how can we capture more of that millennial business and bring them into fresh prepared or a mixing and matching opportunity? Because I think one of the biggest findings of this study is that no meals are equal. We see people, and especially boomers on up, still doing a lot of scratch cooking. That's about 35%. But the majority, regardless of what generation we looked at, has moved to a system where there's a little bit of scratch cooking and a little bit of semi-prepared or fully prepared. And when we do these kinds of studies, we always include pictures and descriptions of semi-prepared and fully prepared so that respondents know what we're talking about. But in other words, people might be making a roast from scratch, but they might be buying the mashed potatoes that can just be popped in a microwave, so they don't need to worry about that part. So there's a lot of mixing and matching going on. And then we have 13% who say that they fully rely on these kinds of meal solutions. The big, I think, conclusion of this slide is the fact that we have a lot of opportunity to provide solutions to shoppers when they're in their store. And instead of seeing produce as produce and deli as deli, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the shopper and say, hey, if they are looking to mix and match, if they are looking for convenient solutions, why don't we have a couple of bags of pre-washed, prepared salad kits next to the rotisserie chicken? Or why don't we at least somehow cross-merchandise these sort of solutions to help shoppers with a very easy way to put together dinner, because that will help us take meal occasions away from restaurants in this particular case. And that's exactly what we're seeing among those 13% who say, you know what, I mostly rely on semi and fully prepared meal solutions. There's really 3 kind of attitudes that go into that. The first one is, you know what, I just don't like to cook. I either never liked to cook or I no longer like to cook. There was a response in there from a lady who was 80 years old, and she said, you know what, I've been cooking my entire life. I'm sick of it. It's just me at this point, and I just go to the store and eat myself something different every night. That was her reason for moving to more fresh prepared. There's a lot of people, and this is the biggest bucket, I don't have time to cook. There are people just like myself with little kids at home, 2 full-time jobs, and these are just simply convenient solutions that help them make the day work. And then we have a lot of people, and this bucket is growing as the economy is getting better, who say, you know what, I love the convenience of not having to cut my onions or not having to do this preparation or having some part of the meal already done, and then I'll mix and match it with stuff that I have in the fridge or the pantry. And that's the people who start to care a little bit less about the money and the money savings and a little bit about the convenience. And just like we see in produce, we have to be very careful that the margins on that, the added, is very much in line with that convenience. Because we have to caution ourselves a little bit there where, sorry, it's hard to think. um, Oftentimes what we see is that dollars grow a little bit faster than volume. So we have to make sure that when we think about these kind of convenient solutions, that the convenience goes hand in hand with the price differential, and that we don't price ourselves out of the market. But that's really about the total value message, putting ourselves in the shoes of the shopper. Now, when it comes to dinner plans, we do a sister study called The Power of Meat, and for years there, what we're seeing is when it comes to that 4 p.m. time, 40% of people have no idea if they're going to eat out or buy food from a restaurant or what they're going to cook. Well, we added a little bit of detail to that in this particular study, and we said, you know, when you decide I'm not cooking and I'm going to have somebody else do the preparation, is that usually planned, is it spontaneous, or a little bit of both? And as you can see, it is, for the most part, a little bit of both. And that means that dinner plans by no means are set in stone. And whether you're a retailer or a restaurant or a producer, it doesn't matter. That's a huge opportunity. We have a great opportunity to get in front of shoppers at that crucial 4 p.m. point to try and get them to our solution and to spend their dollars with us. The interesting part for me here is it raises two big questions. First of all, when it comes to 4 p.m., people decide not to cook. Is fresh prepared top of mind? Are people even thinking about that when they go through their mental list of Wendy's, McDonald's, Panera, oh, I could go to Publix and buy a rotisserie chicken there. So what about top of mind? And we're going to talk about that extensively. The other one is, what is the driver of that alternative dinner decision? You know, what makes people decide what to do? Because the big difference here is in weekdays, that dinner decision to eat out tends to be a lot more spontaneous, 18% plan in advance versus the weekends, 28%. And that has a big impact on the drivers of what am I looking for when I decide somebody else is going to cook my meal. The big difference is speed and time. During the week, people are looking for quick and fast solutions. You know, they worked too late, they don't have time to cook, and they want to be in and out the store quickly, they want to be in and out the restaurant quickly. So the difference between weekdays and weekends predominantly focus on speed. Mood craving is always the most important, but that's the big difference. Ambience also rises during the weekend. It's a little bit less important during the week. So these are very important things to keep in mind as we're trying to connect with shoppers on Fresh Prepared. What is their goal? What is their demand moment? On the weekends, we might be able to keep them in our stores longer, but on the week, it really might be all about speed. And a lot of retailers do that very well. They help shoppers get in and out of the store very quickly with things like dedicated parking or kiosks where you can order your food, do the rest of the shopping, loop back around, pick it up, and off you go. With things like grab-and-go solutions here at several different retailers, just solutions where folks can park, run in, sometimes even have dedicated parking, dedicated checkout stations, and make that speed work very well. Lunch, of course, is another great opportunity, and for those of you living in urban areas, they're going to probably be a little shocked by these numbers. Only 6% very frequently eat out lunch from a fresh prepared. Yes, because we have to keep in mind lunch is again all about speed and easy and quick access. Because if you look at urban shoppers, they are almost twice as likely to come to a grocery store for fresh prepared than shoppers in other areas of the country. Even though they might eat out, it tends to be something that is closer to them, which often tends to be fast food because of the number of locations. So lunch is a great opportunity, and what also turned out is when we get people in the store for lunch, they tend to have a much higher likelihood to then come to the store for dinner. So it's a great entry point for us to connect with shoppers. And really, realistically, when you look at all the market forces, if you look at the growth in value added, if you look at the growth in deli fresh prepared, if you look at the market forces, there is great opportunity in fresh prepared. The difference between food at home inflation versus food away has never been bigger. In other words, it becomes cheaper to eat in a grocery store. It's still getting much more expensive to eat out, and that difference has not been as high as since 1981. So that's a huge opportunity. Millennials, I mentioned earlier, they eat out more. That is absolutely true. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the age that millennials are right now, between 18 and 36, that simply tends to be the age where people eat out most. Then they move into their family situation. A lot of people try to eat at home more. So there's nothing new about that. And in fact, when you compare the ages of millennials compared to prior generations, millennials are actually eating out less frequently than the people at those age groups in prior generations. So we have a great opportunity at retail to continue to drive growth in fresh prepared and mix and match, because millennials love the perimeter and millennials love mixing and matching and making it really their own. But the big issue is whether you look at the semi-prepared, the fully prepared, or fresh prepared, the big issue is that people who are our prime targets, so those that tend to eat out a lot, they don't tend to come to the store a whole lot, and they don't tend to come to the deli a whole lot. So in other words, people that should be our prime audience, we're not seeing them. And if we're not seeing them, we automatically lose. And that's a really big problem, because if you look across the store, trips are falling. If you look at deli, trips are falling. And this is nothing new. We've seen trip decline in our industry for many years. And if we have people in our stores less frequently, again, we automatically lose. So how do we overcome that decline in deli? One of the answers is produce, because produce is an enormous driver of trips, an enormous driver of sales. So how can we leverage that power that produce has and translate it into greater trips to the deli? I think that's an important conclusion of this research. Again, if we have seen that trip decline, a lot of that comes down to what I call image and reputation. Reputation being, are you top of mind at that 4 p.m. time point? Well, the answer really is what reputation? Because no matter how we looked at it, and we looked at the different angles, first of all, we said, how do you pick the primary store? Produce is the number 2 reason why people pick the store that they shop at most. Meat is the number 3 reason why people shop at the store most. Deli, number 15 on the list of 32. So a lot, and there's exceptions, obviously. The Wegmans and the Harris Teeters, and there are some retailers that do fresh prepared so exceedingly well that they do drive deli as a reason to come to that store. But if you look at supermarkets and supercenters and all forms of grocery retail across the United States, deli is just not right now a big driver. So that's the first conclusion. Number 2 is when you say, okay, it's 4 p.m., I've decided that I'm not going to cook dinner myself, somebody else is going to do that for me. How often is deli fresh prepared your destination? Only 12% say frequently, and a whole lot more, 34% said, you know what, I hardly ever will go to a store to pick up that food. So we really need to work on moving people from this bucket to this one all the way over here. And that's really where that reputation yet again comes in. Much like restaurants, we're going to have to find ways to get on top of that radar when people flip through their different options. And that was even further reinforced when we asked people, how do you learn about a store, whether your or anybody else's store, how do you learn about their fresh prepared program? Well, more than anything, it was their own observation. It was either seeing the signage in the store or seeing the deli department, or having tried the deli department. But in other words, if observation, your own observation, is the number 1 way in which people learn about your program, you're only going to be limited to your shoppers. So you're going to have to figure out a way to drive a greater awareness, much like restaurants. And that's what we're seeing here. The number 2 area really is talk between family and friends, just the reputation that somebody has in the community. And the number 3 areas, as much as we put all these different options out there for people to reach out about fresh prepared, whether it was the circular or the website or the app, people just don't really learn about deli fresh prepared from the store. So really what I think we need to do here is somehow reverse and become more relevant and more targeted in our outreach here, so that it becomes more of a conversation among family and friends, so that it reaches out beyond people's own observation. We can learn a ton in the restaurant area. We've all been on social media or been at birthdays or people talk about, ooh, have you been to that new Greek place? How often do people talk the same way about fresh prepared? So that's really an important observation. The best way to go about that is email. It's always email. We have very little luck as retailers to connect with folks on text. Now we all know it's a last minute decision, so text or social media would be a lot better, but there's not a whole lot of uptake on that. Again, the relevant conversation here is what's really important. Quick story, I checked in a hotel a few months ago in Chicago. I get to my room and there's a text message there from the receptionist that says, "Hi, Miss Roerink, I hope your stay with us will be pleasant and you found your room." And I looked at it and I was like, are we serious right now? Like, I'm now being texted by the reception. The next morning I got a text that said, "I hope that I slept well." And again, I was like, seriously, leave me alone. But then I was running late because I tend to talk a little too much. I was running late and I wasn't able to check out and still make my ride to the airport. And I texted her and I said, "Hey, are you able to send me a copy of my invoice, of my paperwork on email?" And she said, "Absolutely, it's underway in 1 minute." And all of a sudden, when I was all against being texted by the hotel, all of a sudden it turned into something relevant for me. And that's where I think we really need to go. We need to prove to people that we can be part of their dinner solution. So how about the image? So reputation, not so much. We need to really work on that. But how about the image? How is the food seen? First of all, compared to home cooked. There's many pluses. Nobody will be shocked to see that convenience is the biggest advantage of fresh prepared over cooking yourself. But there's a lot of other ones, and these provide very important marketing angles for fresh prepared to talk about with the shoppers. So it's reducing waste. It is variety and new meals, flavors, and I'll go into these here in a minute. It's the quality of food made by professionals, and that theme is going to come back again and again. And then it's really a solution when not wanting to cook or not knowing how to cook. So let's look at a few of these. Again, 65% said, it's easy, it's convenient, it saves me time. But it goes beyond just, hey, somebody else is doing the cooking. There was actually a lot of comments that said, what takes me the longest is thinking about what I'm going to cook and making sure I have all the ingredients, because half the time I'm missing one and I have to run to the store for just that one ingredient. So there was convenience in planning and meal preparation. The convenience in the actual meal preparation is obvious. But then there were a lot of comments that talked about, hey, I don't have all the cleanup. I can spend more time with my family. I can spend other time on chores that I need to do. So it goes far beyond the obvious convenience of not cooking. The second one was really about waste, and that one went a number of different ways. There were people that say, I don't need to buy more than I'm needed. I'm a single household. If I need to buy basil, I have to buy a pack and I use a few leaves and the rest goes to waste. Now I can just buy my caprese salad and I just buy what I need. So there's not just waste in product, but also waste in money ultimately. So these comments really came from a lot of 1- and 2-person households. And the other one was, I have to buy ingredients that I just don't use very frequently. So they said they go bad, and over time, I much prefer to buy just what I need than to buy more than I need. The other one, and this one was very interesting to me, because we've all read the articles about Blue Apron, Plated, that they are bringing local produce and produce that people have never tried before, and that they're really bringing sort of new flavors and new experiences to people, those meal delivery kits. Well, it turned out that actually Fresh Prepared very much does the same thing. We got a lot of comments of people who say, I love this or that dish, don't know how to make it, so I buy it from there. Or I've always wanted to know what quinoa tastes like, but I don't want to buy a whole box and make it myself, so now I get to try it. So the introducing of new flavors and allowing people to test something is a great advantage of Fresh Prepared as well. And this is really where I think produce comes in, because the variety and the intrigue and all the new items that are introduced in produce will make a great way to keep that part of the pluses in the Fresh Prepared column going. And again, this is one of the most important ones, I think, is professionals. If you think about their competition, your McDonald's, your Panera, what have you, who works there? Often not professional chefs. It might have been developed by a chef program, but really people see Fresh Prepared as people that are there and are food experts, are bringing expertise and love for food, and that's really because the grocery store sort of, just lives that image. In the mind of the consumer, we're already experts in produce, we're already experts in meat, and that professionalism comes out in Fresh Prepared as well. A really, really important one that a lot of retailers are driving home, especially the good ones in Fresh Prepared. You see a lot of focus on chef prepared, chef creations, the chef's grill, and really that just gives a completely different dynamic than walking into a restaurant where a lot of the food is already cooked. So I think that can be really an advantage of Fresh Prepared and produce, to bring in that produce knowledge into this equation to keep driving growth in Fresh Prepared. How about the drawbacks? And I'm going to actually flip it back because I'm very curious to see, what do you think was the biggest drawback of Fresh Prepared versus home cooking? Jerry, take a guess. Because I was completely wrong, that's why I was curious. That's exactly what I thought. Jerry said cost, and I absolutely thought that people would say Fresh Prepared is more expensive, that's the biggest drawback against home cooking. Turned out not to be a case. Number 1 and 2 were related to health. When people cook their own meal, they see it as being healthier, more nutritious. There were endless comments about, well, I know what's in my meal, which is that number 2. There were specific items being called out, like sugar and sodium and what have you. We'll look at that in a minute. But the first 2 were really related to health, and the third one was cost. And I would have thought that one would be in front and center as well. But there's really big 4 ones here in the minuses. The next one is taste. I just cook something my way. I don't like how they make it, sort of thing. And there's a number of others. So let's look at some of these. The first one being that notion of health and nutrition. As I mentioned, some were very generic comments, and others really zeroed in on items that we're seeing across, frankly, the entire food universe. The crosshairs right now are on sugar and sodium. That's exactly what popped up here as well. Calories, fat. There's people that write comments like, well, of course it tastes better because they put a whole bar of butter in the lobster bisque sort of comments. So there's a lot of suspicion there about, when I make it, I know what is in it. And this is very interesting because when you compare home cooked to restaurant food, nutrition is exactly what pops up as well. So for this matter, shoppers very much see Fresh Prepared as a restaurant sort of alternative in terms of the negatives. Not knowing exactly what is in it, we talked about that one. And I think as retailers, and some retailers do that really, really well, we have some great opportunity to educate, not only in center store, not only on the perimeter, but really in Fresh Prepared as well, and have little signage that shows exactly what is in it, that has the nutrition count, the nutrition manual labeling, have some recipes that go along with it, because the education clearly is extremely important. The fact that our salad bar honestly is as healthy as the salad bar that you have at home, and that a lot of the options within Fresh Prepared are great and nutritional values. Food safety concerns, again, I think this is a great education opportunity. We all have huge trust levels in meat and huge trust levels in produce. How come so many people are so worried about the food safety issues in Fresh Prepared? More than likely, you train the employees the exact same way in all areas. So if you have a certified program or you have people being trained in that, be sure you communicate that because it's important to shoppers. So how about the destination? How does it compare to other restaurants if people decide to go out? Well, needless to say, we all know there are endless different competitions. And that ranges all the way from very high upscale restaurants to family restaurants to fast food, what have you. It all depends on the speed, the mood, the craving, the money that people are looking to spend. But the competition is out there, and that does not even include areas like cafeterias and schools or what have you. So the competition is enormous. Now, when we specifically compared, where do you think Fresh Prepared is better than a restaurant meal? It was really interesting to me because it was about combining the chores of doing grocery shopping, and I'll just pick up my food at the same time. It saves time versus a restaurant. The cost value is better. All the big ones up here, to me, what struck me is that none of those are about the food. They're about the location, or they're about like sort of an operational advantage. And it seems to me that when you're selling food, it really should be about the food. Now, what was really interesting is when we looked at the frequent buyers, so those folks who said, when it's 4 p.m. and I've decided not to cook, where do I go? And they often go to grocery stores. Those people listed the big advantages of fresh prepared being about the food. They said the quality of it is great, the consistency of it is great, the variety, the freshness. And so they much less talked about the fact that they can buy groceries and fresh prepared. They truly talked about the food itself. When we compared it to what is the kind of restaurant that you think fresh prepared most closely prepares to, and we had the full list. Again, we started with upscale all the way down to buffet. You see it's a little bit all over the place, but the one that really pops as this is what I compare it to in terms of price, this is what I compare it to in terms of quality, that was the fast casual. So we're talking about the Paneras, the Chipotles, those kinds of restaurants that are really a bit of a hybrid between a full-service restaurant and a fast-service restaurant. It's actually a bad finding in the sense that that particular channel within the restaurant industry has been growing gangbusters. Where all the other ones are struggling, fast casual has been really strong. They're adding numbers of outlets, they're growing really fast, 12% in sales. So perhaps that's why we have so much pressure on our deli trips and our deli volume sales. But when you look at what are some of the success factors within that format, within fast casual, it is all about the emphasis on preparation, a little bit of a better sort of ingredient, like organic or local or what have you. And if you think about those advantages, they very well become suitable for our fresh prepared. And that's really, I think, where produce comes in. Because if a Panera touts the fact that they're using organic produce, why not start integrating some of those kinds of things in your fresh prepared program? Specifically because fast casual really is driven by that 18 to 34-year-old. And a lot of the big mega trends that we're seeing really apply there as well. In terms of where people buy fresh prepared across all the different channels, it's really all about the supermarket. That's where they're seeing high conversion and they're seeing a really good uptake among secondary shoppers as well. The question becomes, if you do switch stores, like I buy most of my groceries at store blah, but I buy fresh prepared somewhere else, why is that? Well, what it turns out to be, it's location, and we talked about that earlier, especially at lunch, but also at dinner. It's late, I need to pick up my dinner either close to home or on my way from home to work, so no surprise there whatsoever that it really is all about location and proximity. But you know what, if you're not on the way from that person's home to work, then what can you do? And really that's where all these experiential factors came in, and altogether they make up 40% of the reasons as well. And there are things like the food theater, the food itself, the people factor. So let's look at some of those. We've all been to some of the most beautiful retailers around the country that really make a beautiful store where you want to sit down and you want to have dinner there with just some really great architecture used throughout the perimeter, but especially in prepared food. The food itself, and I think this is where produce really comes in, because realistically, around the store, produce is the most beautiful product that you can merchandise. So leveraging the food itself as a way to draw people in. The people factor, we talked earlier about the fact that people believe in our professional chefs and that we really bring that professionalism to the table. So having people front and center and talking about the chef creations can be a huge differentiator against the restaurant industry. Quality and variety, that's another one, like I said, really pops with people that eat there a lot. And what Nielsen found was that those best-in-class retailers, one of my earlier slides, the folks that were all the way over on the left, they have 57% more variety than folks that don't do it well. And that variety predominantly comes from produce. So again, that hand-in-hand success of produce and fresh prepared is extremely important. The ambiance. A lot of people, when it comes to supermarkets, complain about, well, it's like sitting in a cafeteria. It's not very inviting. You're like stuffed behind a checkout or stuffed behind something or another. Retailers that do it really well have really created a lot of fun and a nice place to sit. So ambiance is extremely important. Last but not least, what are some ways in which we can do better and meet and exceed expectations? First of all, we looked at solution types, and there's really a lot of interest for all of them. But the two that peaked the most were the ones where people can grab it, heat it up at the house. That's 38%. We see things like salad bars, meal kits. So really, there's opportunity all around. And if you think about it, produce is really in all those different solutions. Millennials have a big focus on customization. We see that throughout all meal solutions. So have things like pick, match, and we'll prepare it for you on the spot. That's a great way to connect with millennials. When you think about the operations, there's some people who say, you know what, you can do whatever you want to the department. We're not going to change the way we go about it. But the biggest driver really is that of speed of information and cleanliness and ambiance again. Very much the same sort of things that we saw emerge as reasons to go to one store over another. Then a big driver of growth can be that of megatrends. We see in produce and in meat things like local and organic and natural and GMO-free. They all have big, big growth numbers. And the interest for shoppers for that kind of product within Fresh Prepared is extremely high as well. So start looking at what is driving growth in the produce department and start integrating that into your fresh fruit department. Here are some retailers that are doing that exceedingly well. You have a rotisserie chicken that is organic, or you have a local free-range chicken rather than a generic rotisserie chicken. Seasonal items, something different every single day of the week, but preparing people so they can plan. A lot of the younger folks are attracted to very ethnic and fun different cuisines, much more so than the older Americans. But we see universal appeal in the cuisines here listed on your left, with things like American salads, Italian. But again, there might be a way to use that universal product, but with a little bit of a twist. Use your organic produce. Instead of regular meatloaf, use turkey meatloaf. Or use, again, your organic items, your local items, and really integrate produce items that might be new and different to people. The hot new flavors, we're almost there. I'm going to fly through this one fairly quickly. I'm sharing this presentation with anybody that would like to get a copy. But there's just a lot of fun and interesting new flavors out there rather than the new. So really use your imagination when it comes to these kinds of products. So some quick conclusions. First of all, if you want to grow Fresh Prepared, you have to focus on the basics. You know, your rotisserie chicken, as boring as it might be, your pizza, as boring as it might be, you have to get the basics right. From there, it is all about cross-promotion. We talked earlier about people mixing and matching regardless of what generation. So this is really where cross-merchandising produce with some of these solutions comes in, and that's really the second step to growing Fresh Prepared. The third step, and here you see an example of that, how much do you think that bread really costs a retailer? But they put some pre-sliced, wrapped up bread, and it is 99 cents for a slice of bread that goes along with your cup of soup. What a great way to drive up the basket. And there's many, many different ways in which you can do this with produce as well. Last but not least, once you've gotten the basics right and you're starting your cross-merchandising, that's really when you can start building some of those incremental programs and really making it a great destination by looking at things like what are the trends among millennials, Hispanics that are driving the growth in this area? What are some of the global flavors? What is the story of the food? What really can I tell and really become that destination, build the reputation that we are lacking today? So here are the emails. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to share the presentation with you, share the report with you. If you have any questions about that best-in-class research that I mentioned a few times, email Sarah at Nielsen. But other than that, ready for questions if there are any.
Anne-Marie, great presentation. Let's show our appreciation. And we do have time for questions, so any questions from the audience?
Anne-Marie, in the research, was there any feedback from the consumers on expectations on fresh prepared as to whether it should be hot, which obviously a rotisserie chicken would fit in that category, refrigerated? Some of these things are obviously have to be under refrigeration. Other things are shelf stable. Is there an expectation on the consumer in terms of temperature and presentation like that?
Yeah, absolutely. The fastest and with the highest interest was actually solutions that folks can heat up at home. And if you think about it, people might not always hit that store right before having dinner. So the solution type that they love best is something that is a true meal that they can heat up at home. Things like salad bars, sandwiches. So that's really where that speed comes in during the weekend. And then what we're seeing among the best of class is that notion of chef prepared, where oftentimes it's eaten at the store or it's at a store very close by. But yeah, the presentation, what we hear a lot is, if you look at the profile of fresh prepared, it tends to be higher income, smaller families. So it's really all about that portion size. So if you do that prepackaged, make sure you don't make it too big to push people out of the market. Yeah, just ovenable packaging is very important, or packaging that just really drives the convenience all the way from the purchase to the prep, whatever reheating you might have all the way through consumption.
Another question?
Thank you for your presentation. I just need to ask, is there an indication of like how much more consumers are willing to pay for something that's fresh prepared compared to, say, a very raw product from the start? And like, is there like a ceiling where they would rather go to a restaurant instead of just going to the fresh prepared? So where's that margin that's in between? Yeah.
It's a question that's impossible to answer for the entire country because the differences in prices and incomes and what have you. But just like we see in value added for meat and for produce, we have to be very careful that equation between the convenience that you offer and the extra margin, the differential that you put on top of it, continues to be in line. And so what a lot of retailers appear to be doing is just sort of testing that price elasticity of how high can I push that price differential and still give the shopper the notion of, oh, this is a great solution for me that is saving me time and money, and it truly helps me in my life. It provides that value. And okay, now they've pushed it too far. But there is no one particular margin that works across the country. Wish I had that answer for you, but I don't.
All right, thank you so much.
Another question? Anne-Marie, in your remarks today, you talked a little bit about social media, and we've been discussing with the attendees social media over the last several days. In your experience, have you run across any organizations, retailers, food service, restaurants that you think are doing social media well?
There are certainly individual examples that do it really, really well. And interestingly, one of my other little jobs is I run a marketing share group for NGA, the National Grocers Association. And this is where a lot of independent retailers come together and they talk about what's working, not working. We talked for 4 or 5 hours about social media, and what they all concluded is you have to be relevant. It's not about I have to push out content every day or I have to push it out multiple times a day, but it has to be relevant to people. And that's really where my example of the text message came in. It was noise to me. It was a pure irritation to me. Why did this person hope I slept well? I don't even know who you are. But then all of a sudden I had a solution because I needed a copy of my bill to expense it. And hey, look at that, it popped up in my email. And so what all these retailers talked about was the notion of you have to make it relevant. Not long, not frequent, but it is all about targeting, segmenting, and you may have to write the same article 10 different times for different focus groups, but the targeting and segmenting and the relevance is going to only be more important going forward.
Thank you. Anne-Marie Roerink, great presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Let's give her another round of applause.